Good afternoon, everyone. The hour being shortly after 12 p.m. Eastern Time, I'd like to welcome you all to our July 24th, 2024 public hearing of the North Carolina Advisory Committee to the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. I am Mercedes Restucha, Vice Chair of the committee. And before we get started, I'd like to remind everyone that this meeting is being recorded. And we will begin with our roll call. Chair Olga Wright.
Here.
Daniel Bose.
Present.
Pearl Burris Floyd. I'm not seeing on the line. Travis Cook. Also not seeing. Christopher Duggan.
Present.
Marcus Gadsden.
Present.
Stephen Green.
Present.
Jonathan Guzet.
Present.
Jennifer Lechner.
Present.
Angelo Mathey is recused from the project. Patrick Mincy. Not seeing on. Donna Oldham. Also not on. Catherine Reed. Mercedes Restucha, I am here, and Gregory Wallace.
Present.
Thank you. Doing our brief introduction. The U.S. Commission on Civil Rights is an independent bipartisan agency of the federal government charged with studying discrimination or denial of equal protection under laws. In all 50 states, the District of Columbia, and the U.S. territories, an advisory committee to the commission has been established, and they are made up of responsible persons who serve without compensation to advise the commission on relevant information concerning their respective jurisdictions. Today is our second panel, where we will be hearing from testimony from advocates and community organizations on the implementation of Ryland's Law and its civil rights effects on the child welfare system in North Carolina. A little bit about our event format. Given that we have a lot to cover today, and out of respect to our guests, I want to note that we will abide strictly to our agenda. Panelists have been given 10 to 12 minutes for prepared remarks, and I will be providing each panelist a 2-minute warning when their time is almost up. After each panelist has presented, we'll begin a Q&A session. I will use the roll call list to give committee members a chance to speak. Due to the very tight schedule for today, unlike last hearing or briefing, committee members are limited to just one question at a time, and as time allows, we'll circle back for a second round of questioning. We are asking committee members to focus on a question and not share their comments or their own opinions on the topic. And to the extent possible, please direct questions to one panelist at a time. You'll have the opportunity to submit follow-up questions to panelists via staff after today's call. In respect to public comment, members of the public have up to 3 minutes for their comment. Members of the public should kindly note that the public comment section is intended for remarks on our study and is not meant to be a Q&A with committee members or panelists. A timer will be made visible on the screen so that speakers will know how long they have. Speakers will be notified when their time is up. I will reserve the right to provide a warning if the speaker is over time and ask staff to mute the speaker. We ask that everyone respect the time allotted and end their remarks when the 3 minutes run out, as to give others a chance to speak. We will need to give a verbal 1 minute warning for any public commenters joining by phone, as they are not able to see the timer. For all participants, if for any reason it would be helpful for us to provide you with a 1 minute verbal warning, please let us know when we call your name. With respect to defaming and degrading comments, though some of the statements made today may be controversial, we want to ensure that all guests today do not defame or degrade any person or any organization. If a specific person or organization is named in a potentially defamatory manner, they will be provided an opportunity to respond, and this response will be part of the public record. As the vice chair, I reserve the privilege to cut short any statements that defame, degrade, or do not pertain to the issue at hand via the following process. I will first remind the commenter that we do not accept defamatory, degrading comments. and we'll reach out to the impacted person for a response. If the statement continues in the same fashion, I will give the person a warning that we will hard mute them if they continue. And third, the commenter will be hard muted if needed. Our committee report will be based on the proceedings. The committee will prepare a report to the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, detailing findings and recommendations for addressing this issue of national importance. The draft will be available for public review, and we are grateful to all speakers for their willingness to share their experiences with us today. Some ground rules. At the outset, I want to remind everyone present of the ground rules. This is a public meeting, and remarks will be recorded and transcribed for the public record. We have a very full schedule within limited time available. After hearing from all the panelists today, committee members will be called on by the chair using the roll call list. After everyone has a chance to ask a question, the chair will ask if anyone has an additional question. Committee members are asked to use the raise hand function in Zoom to express their interest in asking a question of one or all panelists. I will call on committee members in the order that their hands have been raised. To accommodate persons who are not on the agenda but wish to make comments, we will ask for public comments towards the end of today's meeting. We ask that you raise your hand in Zoom, and I will call on those individuals in that order. The raise hand function can be found by clicking on the reactions icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You will be unmuted by staff so that you can speak. 3 minutes will be allowed per speaker. And again, we kindly remind you that this space is for comments only, not question and answers. Please note that we are required to obtain the full legal names of anyone providing public comment, as required by the Federal Advisory Committee Act and its regulations 41 CFR 102-3.165. The chair must ensure that detailed minutes of meetings are kept, and those minutes must include a list of persons who were present at the meeting, including members of the public who present oral or written comment. Please contact staff at lschiller, SCHILLER at usccr.gov if there is an error in your name and you need it to appear correctly in the public record for today's meeting. In addition, written statements related to today's briefings may be submitted by September 23rd, 2024 to Lillian Schiller at lschiller@usccr.gov for inclusion in the public record. And Liliana just shared that information in the chat for those that have that available. Without further ado, today we are scheduled to hear from 6 panelists. Once all of the panelists have finished their testimony, we will have a Q&A session. Panelists are invited to stay for the remainder of the meeting as long as they are able. So our first speaker today will be Gail Osborne. She is the Executive Director at Foster Family Alliance of North Carolina. Ms. Osborne, you have the floor.
Good afternoon. I'm joining you from Asheville, North Carolina, and a foster parent for 14 years. I've fostered over 40 children in our home, and we, as of Friday, will have 4 adopted children and 1 child under guardianship. Go ahead and go forward, please. So our mission at FFA is to educate, advocate, and support our professionals, our families, and our youth in North Carolina. So that's the point of view I'm coming to you today. We are a family-led nonprofit organization. And so I first want to start out with the fact that if you could back up one screen, please. It was the white one. Not sure what it did. We'll just start here. Well, is that we're in a foster parent crisis in North Carolina. As you can see, we're at 23% lower than we were just 5.5 years ago. And so some of what I'll speak to today is what is leading to this. So let's talk about Ryland's Law from a foster parent's perspective and what I have seen personally in my own home and with children. I had a child that was in my home, had been in my home, incredibly medically fragile, was on a G-tube. Parents refused to follow the recommendations of the medical team. And the child was then taken into custody, stayed with us. Part of our shared parenting was coaching the family on how to take care of the G-tube, how to feed the child, things like that. We were having visits with the family where the family had not been trained, did not know how to do it. Social worker did not know how to do that. And so what happened was the child would go to visits for an hour, 2 hours, even if it was in the middle of their feeding times. And the child would either have to bump up the feedings or delay the feedings. And it got closer to a reunification, and we had noticed the family still had not been trained to the level that they were independent at doing any of this. And at the last second, they took the child from our home and reunited it with the family. And as they were physically removing the child and taking him to the family, I said, "Have you done Ryland's Law?" And the social worker said, "Well, I don't think you understand what Ryland's Law is." And I said, "Well, no, ma'am, I do very much understand. I was involved in that process. I have seen it happen year after year after year." And one phone call to the state level and to the state leadership, specifically to Lisa Colley, who then absolutely ordered that child to remain in the home until Ryland's Law visits had happened. Which meant that that child did not go home for Christmas. And so that child, I mean, that was the whole plan, was to get this child home by Christmas, and it didn't happen. We had the family over at our home. I was gravely concerned about the fact that they weren't trained, that they had not done these visits. They had not seen them feed this child independently. And the state did step in and intervene. However, the social worker for that county, then told the family that it was our fault that the child wasn't going home for Christmas. It made it a very, very difficult situation to finish out the fostering. But in the end, after the visits, the child did go home. So in that case, the state did step in and stop the reunification at that moment. In the last year, in my role as executive director of Foster Family Alliance, we have had 3 calls where Ryland's Law was not being, the visits were not being completed. And I always say to them when they call, "How do you know the visits are not happening? How do you know that Ryland's Law is not being done? I mean, are you with the child?" In all 3 circumstances, the child did not go to daycare. The child was in the home with the foster family, and the visits had been canceled or did not occur, were not even scheduled to start with. And one of them was from the same county that I had the incident with. And then after further questioning, it was actually the same social worker. And so that was then reported. And it has continued to be monitored through other parents in that arena. And notice that I say parents because I'm not sure. I mean, I can't speak to the professional realm of monitoring that, but I can tell you the foster parents are very aware of what needs to happen in those situations. And so we've got several that have, basically been keeping their eyes on the situation. The other thing to know is that there were 2 counties that the families were scared to speak up and identify what counties that they were calling from. And in fact, so scared that when they called us, their number was blocked. And they didn't even want us to have like a phone number to call them back. They wanted questions answered around this. And the bottom line was fear for retaliation against them if they did speak up. So next slide. A few other concerns that I did want to mention to this gathering is that we do have some very documented cases in North Carolina where children are being moved from homes due to the race of the child not matching the race of the foster parent. This can be done at the hands of a GAL attorney. It can be done at the hands of a social worker. And what's happening is it's being played out in court. And the judge is having to go with the recommendations of DSS. And there are several that have been proven that that's exactly what has happened, but there's been several accusations, and it's honed in to one particular county. Secondly, we are getting lots of concerns about children, especially children with disabilities, not being enrolled in school in a timely manner. ESSA is not being followed by the school systems. The county DSSs are not fully trained as to what that should look like. And so therefore, after we began to lose foster caregiver placements because children were sitting in homes, we went and got a grant to hire an advocate to do nothing but advocate in this realm. And so we have now set off a training plan for the state, training statewide professionals as well as caregivers as well as school systems and what their responsibilities are in educating these children. And these children are not receiving services while they're sitting in homes waiting to be allowed into school, waiting on IEPs, waiting on an IEP meeting that's 30 days from now, things like that. I spoke about it earlier, but retaliation is very real to our caregivers in North Carolina. If you do call and complain, if you do make a complaint to constituent concerns, we do have documented cases of where families are being retaliated against, where children are being moved out of their homes because of complaints that are being made after we follow chain of command within the counties. And again, it's county's decision. So therefore, you make them mad, you're going to lose the kid. And number 4, court delays and timelines keeping children in permanency for years. We have a child right now that lives very close to me who is 8 years not being adopted. Has been with the same foster family. It's the delay in court. It's the delay. The appeals, the rights of the parent and this child, the rights have been terminated for quite a long time. The other piece to mention is that it's not uncommon to hear children at 3 and 4 years still in custody and don't have that permanency piece. But the last thing I do.
2 minutes left.
Okay.
2 minutes.
Thank you. And the last thing I want to mention all around the courts is, in fact, just before I got on this call, I had a family contact me and they were told this morning in court, if you do not take guardianship of these children who have been in your home for 5 years, we are moving the children into another foster home who will. Guardianship is being used against our families. It's more for our lengthy, long cases. And our children and our families are hurting tremendously. I myself took guardianship of a child and I'm at $10,000 trying to get a private adoption after the fact. I fell for it. You're not going to move my kid where, he doesn't have anywhere to go, but we're not going to lose him. And so there has to be some work around this. The last thing, the requests from us are, I'm begging. We have a state administrated, but a county implemented system. And the counties are not being held accountable to the level that needs to be done for our children and our families in North Carolina. And one of the solutions that we talk about consistently is that the state needs to have control of the county levels, the decisions that are being made, because that's where things are going very political at times. It's going very feelings based. It's, not at times not policy driven at all. The second thing is the SCAFE funds that are available for children for adoptions, the Special Child's Adoption Incentive Fund. These are your children that have disabilities. These are your children that are long-term care children. These are your children that are going to be one-on-one and not able to attend daycares without lots of support in school systems and stuff, but there's only 37 counties in North Carolina that agree to sign up for this. And of those 37, we've heard people say that they just can't do it financially. So again, if it was state mandated and
Thank you, Ms. Osborne. I appreciate that. We might have some time to follow up with questions and provide that. Thank you. Now we will hear from Toya Potts. Potts is an organizer at Emancipate NC. You have the floor.
Hey everyone, thank you for having me today. My name is Jatoya Potts. I'm an organizer and parent advocate with Emancipate NC. I've been directly impacted by the Durham family policing system. I have fought tirelessly against the family policing system since they took my boys on January 5th of 2018. I have two sons, Mansa and Kimani. They were 6 months and 2 years old then. It pains me as I had to think of what to say and where to draw from for this testimony, as my experience dealing with the family policing system has caused irreversible trauma and harm. Not only to me, but my entire family, generations before me and after me. It takes a ton of mental fortitude to live every day knowing that I don't have my boys with me, not knowing where they are, what they are doing, how they are feeling, what they look like now, how they've grown, not being able to share in their favorite foods, favorite movies, favorite school subject. I'm sorry, I just need a second.
Take your time.
Okay. Whew. Okay. Do you know I haven't seen Mensa since September 9th of 2019? I last told him at a supervised visit that I would be back in a few days. I can see his little face now looking back at me as I walked away and the social worker pulling him to leave the visit. I never came back. I told him I was coming and I never came back. Because the judge ended visitation before my next scheduled visit, I wasn't allowed to keep my word to my son. Do you know I haven't seen Kimani since November 1st of 2018? I missed all of his little milestones, and I have never even heard my sweet baby boy's voice before, hearing him say his first words, yet any words. All of this was taken away from me. This is why I must find the courage to push forward and write this testimony and to speak from my experience on behalf of all of the other parents, families, and children who fall through the cracks because of a system that was never designed to keep us whole and safe. Okay. Today, we are here to examine the family policing system and the effects of Ryland's Law. My family was torn apart after Ryland's Law was passed, and in my experience, this law causes more harm by systematically creating more barriers to reunification. Cases in North Carolina already go on way too long. In fact, Durham is the slowest county in North Carolina to achieve reunification of separated families, with children in care for a median of 677 days. 7 out of 10 children are still in custody after 720 days in Durham County. My children alone were in custody for over 1,825 days. Research shows that the physical separation of a child from their caretaker is often experienced as a significant rejection or loss. Ambiguities for children evoke responses that threaten their well-being during the physical removal from parents, custody, and/or placement in non-kinship foster care. There is also a lot of turnover with the caseworkers, appointed attorneys, and caregivers for children in custody. The judges always say there isn't enough court time. I had 5 social workers over the course of this time because of all of the turnover. I had 3 attorneys because I had to fire my first 2 public defenders before I found an attorney who would actually fight for me. But that was already years into the case, so it turned out to be too late. Months would go by between court dates. My public defenders and the DSS caseworkers and the GAL mostly saw me as another person on their list as my case prolonged longer and longer. As I sat through my court hearings and tried to follow processes and watched other cases, it was clear that my family bonds were weakening and dying through all of the delays. Ryland's Law emphasizes supervised, short, and infrequent visits, but research shows that spending time together as a family through play, conversation, or sharing a meal can also help mitigate children's feelings of abandonment and anxiety. Parents and children can use these activities to work on existing relationships, establish new bonds, or repair strained relationships. My visits were supervised and strained by CPS in court, and then the lack of bond was used as the reason to terminate my parental rights. While Ryland's Law was passed as a reaction to the tragic death of a child, it is important to note that children also die in foster care. Children are abused in foster care, including sexual abuse and serious neglect. In fact, even with Ryland's Law, implemented abuse and neglect rates have not changed and the harm is not prevented. Joseph Doyle in MTI Economics found that children who remained at home had better long-term well-being outcomes, whereas children who were removed and placed in foster care experienced higher delinquency rates, higher teen birth rates, lower earnings, and an increased likelihood that they would become involved with the juvenile justice system and would require emergency health care within a year of their CPS reports. There are thousands and thousands of children and parents who do love each other and can be together safely, and they are just waiting and waiting and waiting to be reunified while all these processes and paperwork and court dates go on for years at a time. And then the bond is weakened and the state uses it against parents, which then negatively affects the children. Kimani's visitation was stopped in 2018 when the state decided to press felony abuse and neglect charges against me, charges that were voluntarily dismissed by the state. I could no longer have visitation with him, even though later the Court of Appeals said nobody actually thought I abused Kimani or even condoned abuse. The charges were used as a tactic to keep me from seeing my baby. I had already had numerous visits with him and all reported great prior to the charges. I had a parent coach say great things about all of my visits and my parenting style. She said I was attuned and natural and caring with Kimani. When the criminal charges were dismissed in 2020, visitation was not regranted when I immediately asked. The system took away my baby son's chance to get to know me because it took years for them to sort out those wrongful criminal charges. My visitation with Mensa stopped in 2019 after the foster parents expressed their concerns that Mensa was starting to act out after his visits. By this time, Mensa was 3 and was starting to understand and process his emotions of not being with me. After the visits, he would cry and scream and become very upset when going back to his foster home. Research says that there is a correlation between having multiple caregivers for children and poor neuropsychological outcomes in terms of executive functioning skills, which may limit their capacity for social and emotional functioning, adaptive coping, self-regulation, decision-making, developing secure attachments, and maintaining healthy relationships. Instead of the judge recognizing that he was trying to cope and was hurt by the separation from his mom, she immediately decided to stop his visitation with me. DSS got a therapist to evaluate him, and DSS told the social worker that the case was headed to termination of parental rights, even though at that time, reunification was supposed to be the official plan. So the therapist said if parental rights are going to be terminated, it would be better to just cut off visitation right now, basically to end the suffering. But what about our chance to reunify? It was a lie that was just written on paperwork, but wasn't really true. I carry these occurrences with me every day. I know them to be unjust and unfair. I never deserved to have my children taken in the first place. I never hurt either one of my children, and I did my best to protect them. I thought complying with DSS by completing my case plan within the first 3 months would be the checklist to have my children returned. But the case plan was a lie too. My children were never returned. They were given to another family, completely skipping over all of my kin who stepped into place ready to be permanent guardians of my children. Because my family was out of state and the paperwork for placing kids out of state was never done correctly or in a timely manner. This is yet another example of the bureaucracy of the system causing harm. By the time DSS finally processed the interstate compact paperwork for placing a child out of state, it was 14 months in, and everyone said, oh, the kids are already bonded to the foster family that wants to adopt them. It should have been a priority to process kinship paperwork fast, but it isn't. My family was robbed, my family was ripped apart, my family was divested in while the foster family was invested in. I never felt like the system wanted me to reunify with my children. They never assessed me as a parent and individualized what was needed in order for reunification to be the ultimate goal. My case went on for 5 years too long. Not because I didn't complete services or there wasn't a family placement, because the family policing system did not uplift my family. The North Carolina Supreme Court upheld the termination of my parental rights in 2023, and my children were adopted out. They no longer have any ties to their biological family, and I've been given a 10-year sentence until my oldest son turns 18. Trauma and separation and pain that my family must live with every day. Pain that I turn into power when I need the extra push of fuel. I know my children are going to look for me one day, and I want them to see that I never stop fighting, even against the biggest giant. They tried to take away all of my power, and I'm still here. I would encourage any parent who is actively fighting for their children to never give up, no matter what the system says, to keep on fighting with everything you got, because you are not alone. If enough of us make noise, they won't have a choice but to start listening loud and clear and stop taking away children who deserve to be with their families. Thank y'all so much for just listening and giving me this time and space. I appreciate y'all so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Potts, for your remarks. I'd like to welcome now Ryan O'Donnell, an advocate, former foster parent, and creator of your case plan. You have the
Great.
floor, Mr. O'Donnell.
Thank you so much. Thank you to Toya. Thank you to Gail. My name is Ryan O'Donnell. Today, I'm coming before you first and foremost as a dad. I was a foster parent in Durham County for nearly 3 years to a little boy. But professionally, I'm also a serial tech entrepreneur. I founded a company called Sunlight, the creators of a product called Your Case Plan, where we improve communication between parties in child welfare cases. In this capacity, I've spoken with literally hundreds of people in this state and around the country who lead various child welfare agencies, as well as many judges, attorneys, and most importantly, families impacted. This has been given me a really unique perspective. It has led me to a few conclusions that I'm looking forward to sharing with you today. And that is that first, the system consistently fails many of the very children that it claims to protect. And second, efforts to reform the system in North Carolina aren't working for all types of parents and all children impacted. So let's first just acknowledge the basics, and that is that child abuse is terrible. Victims of child abuse should be protected. While there is a debate about what we want to call this system and whether this system should be reformed or abolished, I've never heard anyone on any end of the spectrum claim that we want more child abuse. But we should be honest about what is actually happening in our own state. When agencies try to recruit foster parents, you'll hear many things. You'll hear that the system is full of abused children who need a safe and loving home. You will hear that fostering to adopt is financially more attractive way to grow your family than private infant adoption. You get paid to foster instead of having to pay tens of thousands of dollars for private adoptions. However, reality paints a very different picture. In North Carolina, as you all already know, nearly 90% of children in foster care were never abused. These families have simply fallen through the cracks of our broken social safety net, struggling with the healthcare system that doesn't serve poor families, or parents working multiple jobs but unable to pay for childcare, and the list goes on. Also, what's perhaps most important is the primary goal of foster care is not adoption, but reunification. Now, I'd like to tell you my experience as a foster parent in Durham County. As Toya said, one of the counties with the slowest and lowest reunification rates. The first visit we had with our DSS social worker asked if we would adopt this little boy, even though his mom still had her parental rights and they hadn't filed TPR. Social worker said that he didn't have any family, and if they did come out of the woodwork, that DSS would handle them. Worst of all, they told everyone involved that our foster son had no known father. But you see, that wasn't true. They knew who he was all along, but no one reached out to him. They said they, quote, checked their databases, but it came up empty. He actually reached out to DSS after learning that he had a son, not the other way around. He was what they called a non-offending parent. That means he never abused or neglected his son. The whole case team at the time including my wife and I, wanted them to meet a few weeks after paternity was established, begin a trial placement, and start making up for lost time. Sadly, that didn't happen. The judge required him to start jumping through numerous hoops to prove that he was good enough to deserve the right to raise his son, citing specifically his son's disability. So how did the system fail him? How did the system fail his dad? As a single Black man, his dad faced rampant discrimination from the system, seemingly hell-bent on doing whatever it could to prevent them from building a life together. One supervisor said that if he wanted to bring his son home, he should prove he's ready by picking up and dropping off his kid from school every day, which sounds totally reasonable, except he lived over an hour away and his son qualified for special transportation. So not even my wife and I had to do pickup and drop off. He was put on multi-year-long waiting lists for parenting classes. But when a spot opened up, he was told he wasn't eligible because his son wasn't living with him. He needed to bring his son to those classes, but he couldn't get his son until he completed those classes. He asked for expanded visitation to take his son, but was denied. He was required to take a parenting capacity assessment to determine if he was even capable of raising children, despite the fact that he had already raised 3 children. That assessment determined not only he was fit to parent, but he wasn't at risk of abusing his son. DSS and the courts threw that out because DSS hadn't shared all of the case records with that provider. And as Gail mentioned, foster parents get retaliated against. When we advocated for our foster son and his dad in support of reunification, the social worker and her supervisor threatened to remove him from our home. They actually said they were ready and willing to have him sleep in their office rather than be reunited with his dad or placed with his paternal grandmother. Eventually, he was removed from our home and moved across the state to another foster home. This little boy has missed out on the past 4 years with his dad because the system has kept them apart, even though his father has never abused or neglected him, even at one point last year trying to put up his son for adoption. This is what parents, children, and their foster parents have to deal with when they are pursuing reunification. It's why many foster parents close their homes and why there have been so many calls for reforms. And that brings me to my second conclusion, and that is that the reforms aren't working. Our state doesn't follow federal standards and our counties don't follow state standards. When Ryland's Law was passed, there were really 3 main goals: ensure social workers conduct Ryland's visits, invest in reforms and a child welfare information system, which never happened, and create regional offices for better county oversight, which also hasn't really happened either. In fact, since the passage of Ryland's Law, very little has actually improved. If anything, the system has gotten worse over time without proper oversight. And this system is in desperate need of transparency and accountability. As has been shared, caseworkers and supervisors routinely retaliate against both parents and foster parents who speak out. County administrators would rather suppress information than face public scrutiny. Our courts also increasingly seal courtrooms to the public, denying the press access and threatening jail time if parents or foster parents speak out. In fact, the last time we showed up for court, after passing through metal detectors, we were greeted by more than a dozen armed officers standing right outside the courtroom. Does that sound like a system that wants transparency or accountability? Now let's examine what's actually happened with Ryland's Law. First, social workers can use Ryland's Law to delay reunification. Sometimes they don't do it and want to reunify, as Gail shared, but sometimes they don't do it as another reason to not actually reunify children. Delays matter because if your parental rights can be terminated simply because you don't bring your children home long enough, every day matters. Our foster son social worker refused to even meet his dad for over a year, and it took almost 2 years to conduct her Ryland's visit. We shouldn't be surprised to learn that overworked, underpaid, and often unqualified social workers don't follow the laws that we have on the books today. Second, the state was supposed to go live with a statewide child welfare information system through a project that was called NC Fast, which had a budget of over $100 million. The system was rolled out in select modules to select counties. I'm a software guy, and I can say definitively it was unusable and buggy. It didn't work. Just last year, the state actually awarded a whole new contract to a new vendor to start from scratch. The state has spent years and millions of dollars crafting major reform plans that, while it might have taken into account the voices of foster parents like Gail and myself, did not take into account the very voices of families or children impacted by the system, like Toya, like our foster son, like our foster son's dad. Why does this matter? Well, here's another example. When our foster son's grandmother asked that he be placed with her, the social worker, seeming to evoke Ryland itself, said that due to his disability, he could wander outside of her home when it was raining, walk into a nearby creek that might flood if it rained enough, and drown. The judge agreed and denied her kinship request. At the same time, we had a pond in our backyard. That was never an issue. Also, our little boy, despite his disability, learned how to swim the prior summer. His dad and I would take him to visits at the pool in our neighborhood. Instead, they decided to move him to 2 other foster homes. And if you saw what I saw and heard what I heard about what happened in those homes, I think you would likely conclude that this little boy was also a victim of verbal and physical abuse in those homes. And when that happens, how does the system respond? Well, it suppressed information. It praised the foster parents. It portrayed our little boy as lying and as a misbehaving kid. When his dad spoke up, he was threatened with having his son shipped across the state if he continued to speak out about his son's safety. And that brings me to oversight. We were supposed to have regional DSS boards provide oversight because the state has admitted that they can't effectively provide oversight to 100 different county programs. The state has taken over a few counties, but only when there were major public scandals or lawsuits. So who do you go to help? When you speak out, you're not protected as a whistleblower. You're often retaliated against. Now, while folks like Gail and I might get listened to, we can call up county officials, state officials. They might take our calls, but do they take the calls of folks like Toya or our foster son's dad? Without proper oversight, this system is left unchecked and emboldened to disregard the rights that we have as Americans, the right to raise our children, as well as our right to privacy, free press, free speech. Our story is just one out there, but there are many more. For example, many kids in foster care. 2 minutes?
Yeah, 2-minute warning.
Sounds good. Many kids in foster care can have their disability and other benefits stolen by local agencies who want to use those benefits to offset the cost of service delivery. Nationally, it's estimated that this could amount to up to $250 million of theft from kids in foster care, but North Carolina won't release its numbers. At Sunlight, we've aggregated and analyzed thousands of public reviews across all 100 DSS offices, as well as media coverage in the state, and I'd like to share just a few. In Johnston County, one 7-year-old girl was sexually assaulted inside the county DSS office. In Davie County, one mother shared that her child was moved 9 times in a single school year while, quote, social workers lied under oath to the judge and made up the rules as they went. And perhaps most appalling of all, just a few months ago, news broke that in Cumberland County, an adopted mother starved and tortured 5 adopted children, killing 2 of them, Blake and London Devon, before dismembering and burning their bodies. Does this sound like a system that protects children? A system that has been reformed? In summary, our child welfare system in the name of protecting children hurts many of them. Many of these children and their families are members of protected classes who have more rights when they get pulled over for a speeding ticket than when CPS knocks on their door. But like I said, I'm here first and foremost as a dad. Last year, my wife and I welcomed our first biological child, a little boy. And I just like to ask a simple question. If CPS ever knocked on my door, am I going to be treated like my foster son's dad? As a parent, your worst fear is losing your child. But in this country, if you're unmarried or a minority or disabled, you just hope and pray that your worst fears don't come true when CPS knocks on your door. Thanks so much.
Thank you for your remarks, Mr. O'Donnell. We will now hear from Ashley Albert, who is an advocate at Repeal ASFA. You have the floor, Ms. Albert.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Good morning. I am a liberated survivor, and my name is Ashley Albert. I am a mother, peer support specialist, advocate, mental health practitioner, and freedom fighter. I was in the system from the age of 9 through 18 years old as a youth, and then again between the ages of 23 through 29 as a parent. What is officially called the child welfare system really in fact harms children by taking them away from their families who love them most. When I became a mother at 15, I was immediately deemed unfit to be a parent by the systems that claimed to protect me and my baby. I had experienced significant childhood trauma and had been diagnosed as early as age 7 with ADHD, anxiety, depression, and suicidal ideation. The moment I became a teen mom, the system stopped pretending like they were trying to help me. Instead of supporting me, I was incarcerated in juvenile detention for my entire pregnancy, where they took my privileges from me for refusing to have an abortion. I didn't understand why I was being policed instead of being helped. 5 years, 14 social workers, and 15 placements later, I was forced to sign my parental rights over and was instructed by the department to tell my children that they would be better off being adopted into their foster family. This state coercion is not only unacceptable, but it worked because was successful because of the impossible power dynamics at play, which had my back pinned against the wall. I was a struggling young Black mother against a team of significantly more resourced and privileged individuals who had state authority on their side. This lifelong encounter with the family policing system has torn my family apart. Black children make up 20% of the child population, but over 30% of the foster care system. Nearly 1,200 North Carolina parents have their rights terminated each year, and they are disproportionately Black and overwhelmingly poor. The statistics are even worse in Durham, where the reunification rate is much lower than the national average and slowest in the state. 15% of North Carolina children are in foster care because their parents lack adequate housing. In 2021, there were 34 parents whose rights were permanently severed by the family policing system. Only one of those families were white. The law says it is up to child welfare system, a government agency, to protect our Black children. We the people say it is up to us to protect our children. It is our right and our responsibility, most importantly, our choice. The law says it is up to the child welfare system, a government agency. Having to protect a removal proceeding would be difficult for any parent, but when you have trauma-induced anxiety and depression, it makes the proceedings far more painful to endure. Visits prior to termination were extremely painful. Trying to strengthen my emotional intelligence was dreadful. My kids would scream, cry, and kick because having to leave each other 3 times per week. It would take several days to emotionally regulate myself prior to the next visit. This was grief. Ultimately, this coercion led me to sign papers for an adoption that I didn't agree to. I worked with an attorney who helped me enforce the terms of the open adoption agreement, such as the number of visits I would be entitled to, and that my children's names would not be changed. But let me tell you, none of those provisions were honored. After the adoption was finalized, I found out my daughter's name was changed, and I took 1 year and 19 months for me to get a visit. There was found to be a breach of contract agreement, and this has caused significant and ongoing trauma for all parties involved. Ryan's law aims to improve the state's child welfare system to better protect children from abuse and neglect. We the people say extended supervision periods delay reunification, causing prolonged separation and emotional stress for both children and parents. Prolonged separation and the stress of meeting stringent unification requirements strain parent-child relationships. The emotional toll on children and parents can be significant, potentially causing long-term psychological effects. The length and impacts of separation: over half of children returned to parents are separated for more than a year. 1/3 for 2 or more years. In North Carolina, children stay institutionalized for 700 to 800 days, much longer than national average of 8 months. My case is not unique. We are hearing from parents all over the country about adoption agreements being offered as plea bargains. Half of all Black children experience a CPS visit before their 18th birthday, compared to 1 in 4 white children. In Durham County, it is the slowest county to achieve reunification for families. Between 400,000 to 600,000 children are removed from their homes by CPS every year. 30% of cases in North Carolina involve failing to pay foster care fees as a basis of termination. Repeal the Adoption Safe Families Act and stop using cultural and lifestyle choices as a basis for removal. Support community oversight boards to investigate cases and recommend their own holistic and redemptive solution. Stop pouring money into states as an incentive to states for adoptions and give money back to the community and families. Healing, transformative, and restorative justice framework models should be adopted and integrated as it relates to historical trend of the United States slavery against Black people and their families. The Repeal Adoption Safe Families Act Steering Committee is a coalition of activists, organizers, healers, academics, attorneys, and more, leading a radical campaign to reimagine how families are protected and cared for in the United States of America. We dream of a world where Black children can be children, and Black, brown, and poor birthing people are trusted with decisions to care for their bodies and their families. We envision an end to state violence and intervention where parents are deeply supported beyond the point of just survival and into a life where they can thrive. Our first goal towards this end is to repeal the Adoption Safe Families Act, a 1997 bill purported to protect children's best interests, but which instead traumatizes the most marginalized through state enacted violence and family separation. Founded in 2019, our committee was founded to dismantle the legal infrastructure that entrenches a dominant culture of family separation, particularly for BIPOC communities. From forcing indigenous children into boarding schools to selling the children of enslaved parents, white supremacy and the United States child welfare system are inextricably connected. In less than 30 years since ASPA was enacted, Black families are over 6 times more likely to be investigated by child welfare authorities than white families, and twice as likely nationally to face the termination of their parental rights. We fight for our liberation, to get our families back. We will not stop until ASPA is repealed, and repealing ASPA is the only beginning. I thank you for the opportunity and privilege to testify today, to give my story, and to help other families not endure the pain that I have. God bless you and have a wonderful day.
Thank you for your remarks, Ms. Albert. We will now hear from Amanda Wallace, founder of Operation Stop CPS. Ms. Wallace, you have the floor.
Thank you. And if you could put the slides up, that would be great. So my name is Amanda Wallace, and I'm the founder of Operation Stop CPS. For 10 years, I worked for CPS investigating reports of abuse and neglect in 3 different counties in North Carolina. See, when I started 10 years ago, I believed I was helping families and keeping children safe. But that idea was challenged when I took a child into custody that I knew was safe, but my job told me to do it. In that moment, my belief was challenged, and it made me question everything that I had been taught. And I launched Operation Stop CPS in 2021, and our mission is to abolish the belief in the family policing system and keep families together. And we do that by educating families and communities about the reality of this system, while also, calling the community to action to demand change. But today, I rely on the wisdom of my ancestors that tell us the problem or the system this committee is examining has been examined for centuries. And I also understand that some people on this committee are new to this issue. But as somebody that has worked in this system for 10 years, I understand society's deeply held belief that this system protects children from abuse and neglect, and that services are provided to families. But in reality, the child protection system, which we should rename the family policing system, has lied to us. It is actually rooted in the need for the continuation of capitalism and colonialism, which are the larger forces at place. But first, can you go to the next slide? But first, I want to introduce you to the Wynn family, a family in Durham, North Carolina, who lived through this harm. A family that endured over 3 years of family separation. Prince and Zion suffered abuse and neglect while in the custody of the department, not their mother. And regardless of the fact that their mother completed all of the court order services, the department refused to recommend reunification. But it was only because the community protested outside of the CPS building, showed up and packed the court, and supported Ms. Wynn's emotional resiliency through yoga and meditation that Prince and Zion are now home with their mother, Alexis. But this harm is going to be everlasting. See, the moment of separation fundamentally rocks the very foundation of a family. So as you watch this moment, that will remain ingrained in the Wynn family's life forever, I really want you to ask yourself, what if this was your family? What if the state came and knocked on your door and tore your family apart without even an explanation or why or any paperwork? And if you could play the video, thank you.
Can I say something?
Go ahead.
So what they're saying is they've got paperwork from the court stating they're taking the kids. The kids are going to the custody of the state, okay?
So you have to have a reason, right? You have to have a reason, right?
I don't have the paperwork. I'm not in charge of paperwork. I'm just relaying what they're saying, okay? They're saying if they don't get the kids by 4 o'clock, you're going to be facing kidnapping charges.
These kids are in good care. I'm their grandmother, and y'all want to snatch them out of my arms and put them in somebody's house that they don't even know so they can be sexually abused, so they can be abused, period? Why are you guys coming to take my grandkids? It got to be a reason, right? It's a reason. So you're not, she's not giving me no reason.
When you go to court, your lawyer as well as Diaz as well as they'll be able to speak to you about that. But as of right now, we do have to take the children and we do have to go.
Y'all look at this. They coming to take my, come on, Celeste. They're coming to take my grandkids for no reason, we don't have any reason, but I'm going to comply so they won't file charges on us. Lord, send your angels to be with them, God, in the mighty name of Jesus. Look what they doing to my daughter, y'all. Look what they doing to my daughter. I need y'all to share this video, because they doing some illegal stuff right now. Look what they doing to my daughter, y'all. We ain't from down here. They taking the kids away, but not giving us a reason. Look at it. Kids is being taken care of. Kids are being taken care of, don't want for nothing.
And she's taking them to go be with strangers that might mistreat.
And she's taking them to go be with strangers so they can mistreat my grandkids.
Yeah, so this is what is under examination today. The North Carolina Family Policing power to forever change the very foundation of the family unit without any regard to the constitutional or civil rights protections that this state says that all families are entitled to. See, families have a right to family integrity, to be whole, to make decisions on their own outside of the watchful eye of the government. But like what we understand, like in this movement, is that this system was designed to surveil and tear families apart. When I worked for the family policing system, I was able to see how North Carolina was redesigning itself post Ryland's Law and saw the dangers it was going to pose to families. See, what I saw was staff being more reactionary and judgmental to family social conditions. For instance, regardless of any evidence, just because of an allegation of substance use, a social worker could just remove someone's child. Or a child that might have accidentally fallen and the parent goes and seeks help from the hospital, that child is then taken away because now abuse is alleged. Or like Ryan said, the states were having to rely on inexperienced, right, social workers because of staff shortages. And then those families had to deal with these social workers like inherent bias and beginners like caution. And so I tried to sound the alarm while I was on the inside to the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services. And I joined the safety design team in 2020. I attended safety design team meetings for over a year, and no one with lived experience was ever on any of the meetings, even though they were supposed to be. Let me repeat that. No one with lived experience was ever on these meetings. These meetings were nothing more than an opportunity for staff to get together to create new forms and misguided policies. Right? So safety design teams, new trainings and policies, reforms, they do not work. So when Lisa Cawley with the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services comes and testifies on August 7th as a person that represents the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, I hope that this committee is in a position to not only question what the state is telling you they are doing, but what families are telling you they are experiencing. See, oftentimes when the system is examined, families are blamed for their own experiences instead of shining a light on the social, economic, and political conditions created to keep people under the constant surveillance of the system. But I want to take a moment to examine the system. See, the Administration for Children and Families, which is a federal entity, conducts the Child and Family Services Review. These reviews are like report cards, and outcome number 1 of the review evaluates if children are first and foremost protected from abuse and neglect. Federal reviews take place every 7 to 10 years, and ever since 2001, when the CFSR process began, North Carolina has failed every single review. But the federal government keeps giving them more money to reform themselves. But I want to sound the alarm again. But this time I want to sound the alarm to the people that positive reform will never come because this system was never intended to achieve any of the reported outcomes. It was simply created for profit. The family policing system is an industry. The money goes to salaries, the cars, the paper, the foster parent board payments, not the actual families and communities that need the resources. In Durham County, for instance, over 80% of the $68 million Social Services Board budget goes to personnel and operating costs. The family policing system steals money from Medicaid, TANF, SSI, and other child welfare programs and uses it for surveillance and separation. See, far more common than a child that comes into custody because of abuse is a child that comes into custody because the food stamps are cut off, or because a medical condition goes untreated because the family was kicked off of Medicaid. Or a single Black mother trying to stay off of welfare has to choose between watching their children and going to work. But if states just gave families what they needed, there would not be a need to separate families. But we know this to be true, which is what brings us to this moment of resistance in North Carolina. We urge families in North Carolina. Got you. We urge families in North Carolina to take steps to educate and organize locally to respond to the family policing system. And here are some tips. Do your research on family policing, like Google the words family policing system, not child welfare, but Google family policing system and go down the rabbit hole. Learn the chain of command in your local jurisdiction. Not just who's the social worker, but who is the supervisor, the program manager, the director. Who are your county commissioners, the funders of this agency? Start court watching. Courts in North Carolina are open. Go and find out when they are holding court and go sit inside of court and learn. Community members should also build community naturally and have conversations about how you can leverage resources to address the needs that arise in your community. If you are contacted by the family police, consult an attorney immediately. Do not allow the family police into your home without a warrant, and do not allow them to speak to your children alone. And finally, stop calling the family police. Operation Stop CPS is on the front lines fighting to abolish the family policing system with the understanding that abolishment is not just about taking down a system. Like Ruth Wilson Gilmore said, abolition is not just about presence. Abolition is about presence, not absence. It is about building life-affirming institutions. That is exactly what we're doing in Durham, North Carolina. Community organizations such as Roots, Want to Be Well Doula, Emancipate NC are building to ensure families have the right to live a life free from government intrusion. We are building with the understanding that before this system existed, the system of capitalism and colonialism that gave birth to the family policing system, communities, villages kept their own children safe. It was the exploitation of labor and resources coupled with state violence that destabilized communities, especially Black communities. And I see you and I'm in there. And thank you for giving me time to speak today.
Thank you, Ms. Walls, for your remarks. Your time has ended. We will now hear from Corey Dunn, the Director of Public Policy at Disability Rights North Carolina. Ms. Dunn, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ms. Urstucha. Everyone, I am just reeling, frankly, from these stories today. My name is Corey Dunn. I'm the Director of Public Policy at Disability Rights North Carolina. I've been with that agency for 13 years, and I'm incredibly grateful to the panel for your time and attention, and to my fellow advocates who have shared stories that illustrate some of the really stunning harms that are on the line when we're talking about this system. And as a personal aside, though I'm coming to you from Alamance County, North Carolina now, I was born and raised, and until very recently have always been a resident of Durham County, North Carolina. And my own experience with training as a foster parent in that system is part of why I am here today. So let me just say that for those of you who are not familiar, Disability Rights North Carolina is the protection and advocacy agency. As such, we fill a federal mandate to work to advance and defend the legal rights of people with disabilities across the lifespan, across all 100 counties of this state, and across settings, including the child welfare setting. What I think makes us most unique on this panel in particular, though, is that we represent the interests of both children with disabilities in the child welfare system and parents with disabilities in the child welfare system. And both are really critical to getting this work right. And I want to say I'm cutting a number of things from my comments because they've been addressed by prior speakers more eloquently than I. But I want to really focus on this distinction that disability is overrepresented in this system, and that both children and parents are more likely to be people with disabilities in the child welfare system. So in the disability law space, our North Star is the ADA and its interpretation in the Olmstead decision that clarified, in particular, the integration mandate, that people with disabilities should get the supports they need in the setting that's the most integrated setting that is appropriate to their needs. And both parents and children have that right. And while parents' right to the care and custody of their children is rooted in the Constitution, I want to be clear, their rights are not first and foremost in the ADA. As people with disabilities, a parent with a disability's involvement in the child welfare system should be filtered through the ADA and that integration mandate. So what is appropriate for a parent with a disability, and I want to be expansive in our understanding of what that means. What is appropriate for a parent with a disability might be different from another parent. Children in the foster care system are disproportionately people with disabilities. There are a bunch of different forces at work here. Broken systems of care make it more likely that children with disabilities experience inadequate services and supports, which looks an awful lot like neglect when you don't have the resources to make up for the gaps in the system. And child welfare involvement in and of itself is a source of trauma. Before there is any abuse or neglect inside of the child welfare system, the removal itself is traumatic and can be the foundation for significant disability. So I would encourage you to look at all child welfare work potentially through the lens of disability. And that means that when you're looking at the rights of the parent, you're going to see that neglect and dependency and poverty, frankly, look really similar. And it's incredibly difficult to distinguish them in our system. Likewise, our very broken, completely inadequate mental health, intellectual and developmental disability, and other behavioral health system, our publicly funded healthcare system for people with disabilities, has massive holes in it. It's not a safety net. It's barely a set of strings that you can hold on to. And it is underfunded. It is inadequately managed from the top, as is our DSS system. So this inadequate system of services and supports means that children are more likely to have unmet needs that look an awful lot like dependency or neglect, and parents with disabilities are likely to have unmet needs, which may result in behavior that looks a lot like abuse, neglect, or dependency. That doesn't mean that they're the same thing, okay? So while Ryland's Law was a really well-intended response to real risks, it's compounded the biases in our existing system. For children with complex medical needs and other disabilities, extra caution is warranted before any change in custody and placement. That doesn't mean that reunification is the uniquely risky change. Any change in placement is risky, and we need greater involvement of people with a higher level of expertise than we currently have, and we need for those systems of care to be more effective, more seamless, and more trauma-informed. In short, we need to give families what they need to thrive. We will not foster our way out of this crisis, and we will not institutionalize our way out of this crisis. But that's really what we've tried to do. And while I commend organizations like Foster Family Alliance for their efforts to recruit and support foster families, we have to start with removing fewer children from their families of origin and supporting families of origin to be the healthy systems of support that they can be. I want to talk briefly about institutionalization. So institutionalization, we've heard the word a couple of times today. I mean something a little different than the way that other folks have used it. Institutionalization is the placement into a congregate care facility or setting, and especially when that happens over the objection of the person with a disability or their legal caregiver. So in our experience, children in DSS custody, that is children in foster care and otherwise under the legal guardianship of DSS, are disproportionately subject to institutionalization. In addition, children who are Black, Indigenous, Latino are further more likely, or even more likely, to be institutionalized. And so we see that we wind up with children who are in legal DSS custody, but who in fact spend years not in even a foster family, right? We want folks with their families of origin in kinship placements in those most organic possible settings when it's the right choice. But even when that doesn't happen, they're not always going to homes and families like the ones you've heard from today on the foster care side. They are often going to intermediate care facilities for people with intellectual and other developmental disabilities. They are going to psychiatric residential treatment facilities for children and adolescents, and they are going to hospitals. And we are seeing that more and more children are experiencing a unique type of neglect where they are left in the care of a healthcare professional with no parent in sight, foster, biological, or otherwise. So I urge you to include in your analysis panel, include in your analysis of Ryland's Law, the very real risk of institutionalization and its potential impacts for life, and frankly for generations, on families and on people with disabilities. We know that in North Carolina, Black children in DSS custody are far more likely to end up in psychiatric residential treatment facilities. They are likely to end up in those facilities for longer, and they are likely to experience worse outcomes from those facilities. And so I hope that as you provide feedback to the commission on this law, you will also include information about the layered kinds of discrimination we see in this system, poverty-based, race-based, national origin-based, religion-based, and disability-based. And the notion that the child welfare system is doing enough by placing a child in a healthcare setting rather than in a family is completely unacceptable. Thank you. And I look forward to providing written comments as well.
Thank you, Ms. Sun, for your comments. All right, so we are at this time going to take a 5-minute break and reconvene right at 1:27. So if you'd like to mute, turn your cameras off, we will be back in about 5 minutes. Thank you. Thank you to our speakers. Giving everybody about a minute to get back into their seats if they're not already there. All right, at this time, I would like to convene the committee and all of our panelists. For our Q&A, I will use the roll call and invite committee members to participate. Again, due to our very tight schedule today, each committee member will have the opportunity to ask one question at a time. As time allows, I will go down the roll again in case committee members have any additional follow-up or new questions to ask. Committee members will also have the opportunity to send staff any follow-up questions in writing after today's briefing, which will be compiled and shared with the panelists. I ask members to keep your questions brief and to allow for sufficient response time. Again, please focus on questions and not statements at this time. And to the extent possible, please ask your question to one specific panelist. Members of the public will not be invited to ask questions of the panelists. And so starting now, I will turn the floor to Ms. Olga, Chair Olga Wright. Chair, would you have a question for our panelists?
Yes, Mercedes, thank you very much. I would like to direct my question to Mr. O'Donnell. With your tech background and your mention of NC Fast, are there any recommendations that you may give to our committee regarding any updates, any upgrades, or any particular comment you would like to make concerning how NC Fast could better serve this Child Protective Service system? Thank you.
Yeah, well, I mean, first and foremost, it'd be great if we had a system. Many county directors have shared with me that, they've basically had to be flying blind without access to even basic information about their cases. I've heard many stories about how caseworkers will brick their phones. So reset them to factory settings when they quit so that information is lost and their supervisor doesn't know what they did or didn't do. So I would just encourage, from the state level, I think we need to get a new solution in place both very quickly. So hopefully the new vendor that they've chosen will be able to do that. But I think, more importantly, we should have funds available so that we can actually improve the actual operating system that we use to conduct social services. So that's not just child welfare specific, that's really a whole host of tools. Individual counties often do not have the resources to purchase new technology. And as you can imagine, the state moves incredibly slow when it comes to purchasing and implementing new technology. What I would encourage you to look at as well is that under new guidelines with Title 40 of Social Security, states can use those funds to help purchase technology to both improve the child welfare system, but also to improve how our courts are actually running for both court improvement programs, but also to help improve the quality of representation for families. So I think those are a few things that I would want to make sure that the state looks at.
Thank you, Mr. O'Donnell. Daniel Bose, do you have a question?
Yes. Let me first thank the panelists for taking the time to educate us. That was an exceptional briefing. I mean, I can't imagine it being better. So thank y'all each for that. One thing I wanted to ask about was what I heard from Mr. O'Donnell, and really everybody said this, but that one of the issues is the state isn't following federal regulations and the county is not following state regulations, and there's no accountability for the failure to follow either one of those. And so I'm hoping that Mr. O'Donnell maybe, but I'd welcome this from anybody. If y'all could talk a little bit more about the tools that the counties are using to shirk, accountability from the state. And I already heard about sort of the guardianship being misused. There was a reference, so I don't think Ms. Osborne got to talk about the kinship placement. And then there's a couple ones, but I'm hoping somebody could talk a little bit more about those issues that sort of allow for the failure of accountability to occur.
From the kinship point of view, it's either there is a delay in getting the kids there, so it may be a year or two later before a kid will go into a kinship placement. We see that quite often, but it's left up to the county to make that decision, and it's rooted in the court timelines and things like that, and so the urgency is not there. North Carolina just did start a Kinship First initiative where they're paying half of the board rate to kinship providers of children that have come into custody, which has brought it to the forefront. But again, I mean, it's left to the county to pay initially and then get reimbursement from the state level. And we're here and we're seeing and hearing that it's being picked and chosen as to which cases they're going to do this to. And we've got very clear examples of cases where that was not followed.
Yeah, I'll just build off of that. I mean, I think when you remove a child, ideally, the first step is there family who could have this child placed with them? A lot of times that search doesn't happen until after the child is removed. That parent isn't asked if there's a safe person to place the child with. And if they are, that person's often written off. I mean, we've seen it in some counties where parents or like grandparents or aunts and uncles have to sign these safety plans that bar contact with a parent, or create situations where, you know, a grandma has to choose between their relationship with the grandchild or their own child. And in some of these cases, these are done outside of the system where we do not have much data. And when that happens, those families receive absolutely nothing. And there's very little oversight, and there's very little additional services that are actually provided, whether they be like concrete economic supports, like foster care, board rates, that folks like me and Gail are eligible for, or even just other services to help people get, on food stamps or Medicaid.
I think first we would have, like, in regards to this question, in regards to like the state providing oversight, I think we would first have to believe that the state would want to provide oversight that actually betters families. Like the state has put in this constituent complaint line where counties or families that are in individual counties are supposed to be able to make complaints to the line, and then the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services is then supposed to like look into this issue, but that's not happening actually on the ground. Like families are making these reports and they go nowhere. And then also regional offices, which is a reform effort of Ryland's Law, from on the ground and from families that I've spoken to, they don't know who their regional office director even is or who to reach out to even complain about what is going on. And so again, what you see is systematically, the state does not want to provide oversight, and they just let the counties run amok.
I would agree from my own experience that maternal grandparents, and godparents tried to get my children. They came here the first day that my children were taken, and the state would not put them in the care of family. They just deemed it as emergency dependency and placed my kids with another family. So yeah.
Thank you all.
All right, thank you. Christopher Duggan. Do you have a question?
Yes, sorry. First of all, I'd like to thank all the panelists. It was extremely powerful to hear the testimony today. I'd ask, and it's a general question, are the panelists allowed to provide some written statements to the board here that we could have? I heard a lot of statistics and tried to write as fast as I could, but some of the statistics that were said, I missed. Specifically, Ms. Albert's statistics at the beginning of her discussion. We're here and charged with determining the impact of the foster care system, specifically on minorities, but I also heard about the impact on those with disabilities as well. And I guess this question is to the board here. Is there a way for the panelists to submit some written comments post this hearing?
Yeah, and I'll answer that. Panelists are invited to submit written comment. We can ask follow-up questions in writing of our panelists, but also our recordings are being transcribed, and so we'll have a transcript of the briefing and to be able to reference that. And I'll invite staff to add anything there.
Can I just ask Ms. Albert, can you at the beginning of your session, you talked about some of the statistics. Can you go over those again for me? as far as the impact it had on the minority community?
Yes, where it talked about half of all Black children experience a CPS visit before their 18th birthday, compared to 1 in 4 white children, and
Well,
between 400.
yeah, it was actually more towards the beginning.
Okay. Black children make up 20% of the child population, with over 33% of the foster care system. And 1,200 North Carolina parents have their rights terminated each year, and they are disproportionately Black and overwhelmingly poor. 15% of North Carolina children are in foster care because their parents lacked adequate housing. And in 2021, 34 parents whose rights were permanently terminated, severed by the family policing system, but only one of those families were white.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms.
Thank
Albert.
you.
Marcus Gadsden, do you have questions for the panelists?
Yes, thank you. And I would like to focus specifically on Toya. Thank you for sharing your experience. It was heartbreaking to hear. Can you explain what you think justice would look like for you at the end of this road? So in other words, what would a change to the system look like that would allow you to feel like you've been put back in a position and achieve some kind of justice for what you've experienced?
Honestly, I don't think justice can actually be achieved. I think because a lot of it is irreversible, like things that I can't tangibly like get back. Like I can't get back things that I've missed with my children. But I would say I just want my children back. Like that's it. At the end of the day, if I had a wish to make it all come true, that's what I would want, my children back. I do this work to be the voice for not only for myself, but other parents and other families, so it doesn't have to happen to other families. And I think it just takes a lot to actually do this work. But I'm here to just share my story and my experience in hopes that things do change and that resources are actually put back into the communities, back into the families, really investing into like what do families need to be whole instead of just ripping children away. So to answer your question, I don't think like there's no form of justice that could be done because the harm has already, taken place.
Thank you.
Stephen Green.
Yeah. Okay. First, I just have to say just how powerfully I was affected by all the testimony I heard today. And I mean, I think you could even hear it in my voice. I mean, I didn't expect to be wiping tears away. Those of you who told your personal stories really affected me, really affected how I think about this issue. Like, I plan to do everything I can with this committee, but even beyond this, I mean, I feel like, okay, I'm ready to be like a family rights activist now. So thank you to all of you so much. So many questions I would want to ask, but I think, and to some degree, following up on what other people have brought up here, I'm just kind of flabbergasted in a sense that we don't make more of an effort to just put children with kin. That you would just go to a grandmother's house and say, sorry, we're taking it away. Your daughter has a drug problem. You seem to be a fine parent, but tough luck. Or, you find a dad like Mr. O'Donnell talked about, and this dad has successfully raised children and is ready to be a parent. There was the story of kin from out of state, like, well, it's out of state paperwork. And this is just mind-blowingly awful to me. And I'm not sure who to ask this, but so I'll just ask. And to what degree, because like again, there's, oh my God, so much that needs to be fixed here, but at least on some level of like a legal change that really makes a strong preference for, look, if we can get children in with family relations fast, right? That there is urgency, that there's priority. Like, how much difference could something like that make?
But it's already there. I mean, like, it was just
Okay.
passed, and it's there. So, and it goes back to not following policy.
Wow. Okay. That's
Yeah,
even
I
more
think
depressing.
it is. And I think to Ms. Osborne's point, like the decentralized nature of this system, the 100-county system, which means 100 DSS directors, however many, 1,000-ish county commissioners are really the decision makers. It is entirely too diffuse, and there is entirely too little expertise at work.
If I can add comment to that, I think we need to look very detailed on an individual case level, because what actually happens is when you get your child removed, you have to show up in court. You likely have not spoken with your attorney until you show up in court. You speak for a few minutes before and after court, and then you don't hear from them until the next court date, which could be 3 months, 6 months down the line. Functionally, like how you would get a child to a kinship placement, someone in that courtroom has to make a petition. Someone in that courtroom has to go, investigate and determine whether or not that person is fit or not. And as was mentioned in the last set of panels, we rely too much on these distributed agencies and oftentimes untrained workers who don't know these rules, don't know these laws, and honestly are too overworked to actually follow them. I just saw Gail's comment. I mean, we pay our attorneys very, very little. We've increased board rates for foster parents. We haven't increased significantly what we pay our attorneys. And I think at the end of the day, if there's one thing you could pass, it's that, we don't need to create like a new standard where we say X number of kids have to go into kinship care. Family preservation means something different to every single family. But what we should be able to do is at least invest in robust interdisciplinary family defense. Because these cases are so unique, the only way to ensure that a goal like that would actually be achieved is to ensure that the parents and the children in these courtrooms actually have competent, high quality legal representation. If they don't have that, we're just going to be hearing a one-sided debate in these courtrooms. And it's often easier to keep a child placed with a foster parent like me or Gail than to do the work to actually get that child with family.
Yeah, I also wanted to say, like, looking at when you asked about the law, but the law is so much different than actual practice and what is happening. And so even if you change the law with no oversight, like there's nothing that's going to change for families, and not oversight that looks like more state committees that, are going to say that they're going to look into this issue, but community oversight boards, right? That look in that are tasked with people with lived experience, right? Community advocates that are able to look into these situations to provide recommendations that are very clear as to how reunification can happen. Where is the family? Like asking these questions that the department is never going to ask, because understanding the intended purpose of this system is not to keep families together or look for kin. It is only to separate families. And so again, when we're thinking about things that need to change, we have to take like power from this system and give it to communities.
Thank you for those responses. Jonathan Gazay.
Oh, thank you. I don't have any questions. I just want to join the others in thanking all the panelists. It was very interesting and very moving.
Thank you, Mr. Gazay. Jennifer Lechner.
Sorry, I was having trouble unmuting myself.
There you go.
I want to echo the other board members who have already spoken about how moving this afternoon's testimony has been and how brave you are for coming to share it with us today. I'm very grateful for that, and it's certainly given me a lot to reflect upon. I do want to highlight just a couple of quick things. One is Mr. Duggan's already requested some additional stats and sites. So if you're providing written testimony, that would be helpful to me as well. I was sort of rapidly scribbling about overrepresentation of different minority groups, and I'm not sure that I got it right. And to have the sites along with that would be incredibly helpful to me. And then my question is, and I guess I can open this to anyone, it probably is better addressed perhaps by either Ms. Osborne or Ms. Dunn as kind of statewide organization representatives, but feel free to opine if you have thoughts on this. Are there states that are doing it better? I hear that the changing laws may not be the issue. It is enforcement of existing laws and regulations, and it's our decentralized diffuse system that somewhat prevents that. I've heard community oversight as a possible remedy, but are there other states that are doing it better than we are, and things that we should consider as a potential recommendation?
Can I speak? Hi, okay. So in Seattle, Washington, we are doing participatory defense alongside with the prison system, where cases are getting staffed by the community and supports. Attorneys are coming. We sit in, we write letters of support. We are showing up in the courtroom with individuals. And not only are we staffing criminal cases, but we're also we're just implementing child welfare cases and also immigration cases. I think a practice or a module like participatory defense, something that when we're talking about ending family policing or policing punitive authority figures coming into alignment with those that are already practicing these. And I'm pretty sure most of this is happening in all states. What is happening now, not in every state, is that participatory defense is being utilized in child welfare cases, and which is another part of transformative justice, restorative justice, healing justice. And this being Black Mental Health Month, would be a really it would be a gift and a gift and a sweet kiss on the cheek, a hug, to be able to implement healing justice, which is a Southern practice that comes from the South, to unravel and to create some avenue for families of color to heal as it relates to ancestral and cultural practices.
Thank you.
And Ms. Osborne's listed some New England states that might be held up as models. I will say that you don't even need to look that far to see states that don't rely on a completely decentralized county-based system. That's very unusual. We have less statewide oversight than any other system I'm familiar with. And I think that, you know, we made legislative strides toward regionalization, and the inertia and the deep belief that every one of our 100 counties is completely unique and couldn't possibly understand one another is kind of baffling.
As someone who works with the court system, I understand that thought.
Thank you for those responses. I'm going to ask my question now. And I'm going to direct this one to Ms. Dunn. You mentioned the psychiatric residential treatment facilities and people coming into, or children coming into DSS custody and not going into foster care family placements, but more of these institutional settings. And I'm curious if you could, and you mentioned also the ISFMRs and the hospitals, if you could kind of describe what those settings look like, and if and how Ryland's Law is working with them. Do we have social workers visiting them in those settings on a regular basis, or what does that look like?
In short, no, we do not. So we have implemented this system. If kids in psychiatric residential treatment facilities, and I'll go back to what those facilities look like in just a second, But kids in those facilities, there's very little even pretense that people are going to get them out and connect them with a family of origin or otherwise before they age out of this system. Horrifying. So, and they can't stay in those facilities past age 18, so we're just treating them at 18, right? They look a lot like carceral facilities. There's a lot of structure. There is a lot of restriction of movement. There's a lot of focus on authority and hierarchy and rules and respect, and not a lot of mental health treatment, though that is what they are ostensibly created for. They are not an evidence-based practice. They are very expensive, on the order of, I think the rate is about 500 and change a day. Can you imagine what the family of origin or a kinship placement or even a high quality foster placement could do with a $500 a day rate? Can you imagine the amount of love and support that could be poured into a kid if their parents weren't worried about getting food on the table? Can you imagine what an incredible waste of potential and human life this is? Those facilities don't prepare kids to be adults. They just keep them out of the sight of community members.
Thank you. And our last member, Mr. Gregory Wallace, do you have a question?
Yes, like the other panelists, I want to thank, the other committee members, I want to thank the panelists for being here today. My question probably would take too long to answer, but I would like to suggest that if the panelists submit something afterwards in writing, that you would include 2 or 3 specific suggestions for how the system in North Carolina can be improved. And if you would prioritize those, if you could make only one improvement, what would it be? Or 2 or 3, so on. It's too big of a project for us to devise a massive blueprint for reforming the North Carolina child services system, but we do want to make specific suggestions in this report, and so any specific suggestions that the panelists have would be helpful. And in addition, those of you that would submit your statistics, if you would source those as well, not just say the statistics, but also what the source of those statistics are. Thank you very much for all of your input today.
Thank you. All right. And so we have about 2 more minutes for questions to our panelists. And so I'm going to go back through, and if anybody has any of our committee members have any questions, maybe 1 or 2 for our panelists. I don't see anybody. I see somebody.
I do.
Yes, go, Jennifer. Yes, please.
Corey, Ms. Dunn asked if she could add something about Medicaid, so I'd like to call on her.
That's right.
Perfect. Thank you, Ms. Lechner. I just want to add that there is a plan that is set to go into place in December. I think it's unlikely that it actually goes into place in December, but it's called the Child and Family Services Plan. It is a statewide Medicaid plan for people who are eligible for Medicaid by virtue of their involvement in the child welfare system. A critical piece, well, a couple of critical pieces. Statewide-ness is really, really important here. Currently, kids and families get bounced between service providers and have difficulty staying with the providers they prefer because of arbitrary geographical constraints. So statewide-ness in availability of services is really key for this population. And second is that we fought really hard to get caregivers, parents, and siblings eligibility for services under this plan, in addition to any child who is removed, right? Because families are systems, they aren't just a random collection of people. And that part of the plan has been delayed, the implementation of that part of the plan, the eligibility for the broader group of eligibles, caregivers, parents, siblings. And it's really important that we address those systems. It's not, that only providing services for the kid who is removed sort of implies that the kid who is removed is the source of the difficulty. And of course, that's completely backward. We need to do a better job of supporting families to be healthy. And so I would suggest that the CFSP is really valuable, and that the provisions that would allow for broader eligibility for parents, siblings, and caregivers are essential.
Thank you for that specific information. And then Daniel Buzz, do you have one follow-up question? And I think we have to move on to public comment.
Yeah, I just had a question about a statistic. I caught most of them, but there was one that I didn't catch that I thought was interesting. I think Miss Albert said it. I thought she said 30% of something is based on failure to pay foster care fees. And so if I interpret that right, could you explain a little bit more, or just sort of reorient me?
Mr. Bowles is your name? I put
Yes.
that I replied to you. I've seen your question in the chat, and then I replied to it. I'll read it out loud as well. I had said Black children make up 20% of the child population, but over 33% of the foster care system. Nearly 1,200 North Carolina parents have their rights terminated each year, and they are disproportionately Black and overwhelmingly poor. The statistics are even worse in Durham, where the reunification rate is much lower than the national average and slowest in the state. Happy to answer anything else.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Albert. And I'm going to, I think my computer might be a little bit frozen, but I'm going to now move on to the public.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
before you do, I think Mr. O'Donnell was kind of
I
raising
wasn't
his
sure if you
hand.
were frozen like that. Mr. O'Donnell, please, if you have a follow-up on that.
Yeah, just if I heard Daniel's question correctly, asking around like failure to pay foster fees. I think it's important to name that many of the parents involved in the child welfare system are poor. And you can have your parental rights terminated if you do not pay child support. And those burdens might not, at face value seem like a high bar, but to jump through all the hoops of completing all the service plans, you're often having to miss work. So you have already kind of an increased risk of employment instability. And, I just think it's sad that we take, in general, children from overwhelmingly poorer families and then are willing to sever their bonds simply because a parent is unable to pay child support when they might need those dollars to provide for their own kids. Many times parents are unable to request any sort of funding or assistance from county agencies to provide for their children, and often have to pay out of pocket for drug tests, transportation, visitation, all these types of things that are not always accounted in child support payments. So I just want to make space that that happens today, and we can follow up with more stats.
Thank you, Mr. O'Donnell. I'm going to squeeze in one more question for Mr. Guzay because he didn't ask one the first go around. Mr. Guzay, you have a question?
I was glad Daniel brought that up because I had noted it too. So I'm still not clear though. A parent whose children are taken and placed in foster care has to pay fees to the foster family or to the system. Is that what we're hearing?
That is correct. So you can be charged for child support while your children are in foster care. If you have a parent, grandparent who might be leaving survivorship or VA benefits to your child, those benefits can be taken by the agency. And that same agency can pull down state and federal funds to offset the cost of delivery. So it's kind of mind-boggling that we charge parents who might be struggling to make ends meet while we already have dollars that are allocated for servicing them. Again, I can follow up on on specifics. And maybe Toya, I just saw a comment. I'd love.
Thank you, Ms. Albert, and then we'll have to go on to public
Okay,
comment.
I just wanted to,
You wanted to add something?
yes, thank you. I just wanted to say that is true. By the grace of God, I had the opportunity to work with the Department of Social and Health Services that separated from the Department of Children, Youth, and Families, where they seen the rate of parents being penalized with child support and not being able to pay. And I was able to get that written off due to like having disparities such as like mental health, being homeless, things like that. But it takes a lot of work and a lot of emotional capacity to even be able to do the research and to like advocate for yourself. And in that space, parents aren't even they're just trying to be able to just visit with their kids. So trying to eliminate child support, like all of those are punitive measures for to a parent, and most of the time they haven't even had a job for like a year. So I just wanted to say that is very true and heartbreaking at the same time. And also, to coincide with that, in Washington State, I just had to do a report where we got youth who are incarcerated because they get charged with they have those fees that they have to pay for like being incarcerated, like paying back to the court and everything. Youth are having to pay those fees and they don't even have a job, and then those get penalized to them by the time they're 18. It's held against them when they're an adult. So we got that wiped away for the youth in Washington State that are incarcerated.
Thank you, Ms. Albert. All right, and so now moving on here to our public comment portion. Thank you again, all of our panelists, for presenting today at today's web briefing and for the committee's engagement. This was, as we've all said, very very sensitive topic and gut-wrenching, really. And thank you so much for sharing your stories and your experiences. We're going to transition into the public comment. If we run out of time and members of the public are interested in sharing comments with the committee, please remember that we can continue to accept written testimony until September 23rd at lschiller@usccr.gov, and that is in the webinar chat. So really quick, some ground rules for public comment. For committee members, before we begin public comment, I'd like to remind the committee members that this is an opportunity for us to hear from the public. This is not a space to engage in discussions or substantive questions. If a committee member needs to make a clarifying question of a public commenter, please raise your hand and I will use the vice chair's discretion to determine if the question is appropriate. Ground rules for public commenters. Members of the public that need to be reminded that USCCR is not an enforcement agency, and the committee's primary task is to send recommendations to the Commission on Civil Rights, various topics on civil rights. The public comment section is limited and intended for any members of the public to share their thoughts or experiences related to the topic at hand. This is not a Q&A session. We are required to obtain the legal name of anybody providing public comment. The chair has to ensure that the detailed meeting minutes are kept, and those minutes must include a list of people who were present at the meeting, including members of the public who presented or gave written or oral testimony. So if you do provide a comment, please raise your hand in Zoom and you'll be called in the order that your hand was raised. You will have 3 minutes and there will be a timer on the screen. You'll be given a heads up when your time is about to be almost up. Again, please do not defame or degrade anyone or any entity during your comments. If needed, we may intervene to redirect the comment to the topic at hand and to maintain a respectful environment. After the warning, I and or the USCCR staff will have the right to mute anyone or even adjourn the meeting if needed. And again, written comments can be submitted to lschiller@usccr.gov by September 23rd of 2004. So I'm going to see now I've got 5 raised hands and I'm unclear as to the order that they came in at, but what we will do is
Yes, Chair, this is Anna. I can step in
perfect.
here.
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for your interest. Our first speaker is Todd Kiagu. You're welcome to unmute yourself now. Press *6.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Are you going to put the timer up?
Yes, we will do that. Thank you.
All right. So first off, just want to say thank you to everyone that spoke. It is very emotional when you're telling the truth, and especially with what we're currently dealing with in this committee conversation. So just to make a comment, right? This is what it's about. So what I am hearing, and to be a person who has experienced this thing, is that our fiduciaries are breaching their obligations. The individuals in position are not following the law. I heard the word policy and reference. We're talking about the supreme law that establishes everybody's position. And it's, again, bewildering that these men and women who are in these positions of service and providing, I mean, let alone the Social Security Act itself does not allow for an agent to take charge of a child. This is written within the acts. So it's like the one thing Mr. O'Donnell said is lawsuits. And, to anyone listening, that's what has to be done, is suing these individuals who are sitting down and checking off or putting fictitious signatures on applications. I've been in meetings with families where the workers are putting computerized font signatures so they can get whatever their portion is of that funding. Again, just as Mr. O'Donnell said, state provides. United States government provides the funding. We're in a trust. Something that Ms. Wallace put forth, the indigenous, and what I'm going to step on is the Aboriginal relationship that we as the American Indian have with the United States. So when we as the families are being accosted by these fiduciaries who have an obligation of legal, moral duty, come into the homes, take the fundings and etc. And I can't deny we're having a committee meeting about something that's been going on for at least decades. So I definitely want to say again, thank you very much for taking your time to express yourselves in this moment. Very powerful. Much love to everyone, because indeed, family is the foundation of all of this. Period. So, to those of you that are making this council decision or recommendation and so forth, please, these agents need to be reprimanded for the harm they're causing. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Next up, we have Martha Grise. You may press *6 to unmute yourself.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, perfect. Hi, my name is Martha Grice, and I just definitely want to thank the committee and the members for actually even looking into this. My question and what I would like that I didn't hear answered was how the federal and state dollar money that is given to the state of North Carolina is spent on our children. And I often wonder if DSS gets more money if they put a child into foster care as opposed to giving that child to a kin provider. Maybe the reason why DSS is placing these children with the foster care system or in an institution instead of placing the children with their kin providers is because they are receiving more federal money if those children are actually placed in these entities, the foster care or an institution setting. Also, I'd like to see if the committee can look and see how the child support is being calculated for these parents. a lot of times what I see is that these mothers and fathers that are vulnerable to begin with are having to pay child support, which is not calculated the same way as a normal person that wasn't in DSS has to pay child support. They're having to pay even more child support. And they're also, part of their child support includes the foster fees, which they're having to pay almost like $300 or $400 a child in child support. And that is used against them to terminate their rights for their children. So I wonder if we could see like how the child support is being calculated and what is being done with the child support once DSS actually gets the child support. And what are they doing with the fees that they're charging these parents for the child support? But I think if we follow the money and we follow like where DSS is actually getting more money for these children, I think you will find that DSS is placing these children in foster care and institutions because they're getting more money for that. And I don't know if we can make this public, or, we're asking for stats and how the money is being spent. Where can a person go and see how this money is being spent? Because this is a public entity, right? We should have access to how all this money is being spent. Okay, that's my comment. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak.
Thank you. Next up, we have Kiki Woods. Kiki, you can press *6 to unmute yourself.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me well?
Loud and clear.
Okay, beautiful. So I am a member of Roots, a local organization here in Durham, North Carolina. And so we heard lots of testimony today around how resources are being used and that there are funds allocated to being able to quote unquote help families. Very little of those resources actually go towards reunification. And there is also this monopoly of resources that is held by the Department of Social Services. And very, very little of that is to actually help the community or to even prevent the removal of children. And so I would just want to raise some awareness about the need for resources to be available in the community to organizations such as Roots that is not attached to this system. When there are folks who are looking for, there's a housing crisis here in Durham, and with no laws on how much rent can be raised, people are finding themselves unhoused, even those who have jobs. Even two-parent homes are finding themselves with lack of resources and the ability to just maintain in this rising cost of living. And so they're having to go to organizations to look for help, and there are just very little resources, and many of them are attached to this system. Well, with that comes this over policing and surveillance. And so if someone just needs a little bit of help with rent, they have to sign up for in-home services, or they have to be surveillanced, or they're being told that they have to be policed essentially on whether or not they can, successfully take care of their children, which puts them at greater risk for having a removal simply because they need resources. And so as organizations, our community organizations who are directly boots on the ground, working with families, working with individuals, we see how hard they're trying and looking for housing solutions, looking for options that allow people to feel safe and rooted, grounded, and centered so that they can continue to effectively parent their children without having to worry about how to keep the roof over their head, or being too scared to go and ask for resources without being with this fear that they're going to come into their lives and be forced to enter into some type of case plan or service plan when they just simply need to be able to live and survive with everything that's going on in our society right now. So I just wanted to bring some of that awareness that the system is making a profit off of trauma in the lives of families.
Thank you, Kiki. Our next speaker is Yolanda Rushing. Yolanda, you can press star 6 to unmute yourself.
Yes, I'm here.
And I can hear you.
Thank you. On August the 7th, 2023, I received a call while meeting with an attorney. This call was one that I never thought that I would receive. The secretary came in and interrupted our conference meeting and stated that the police were at our home to remove my children. I immediately talked to my husband and was asking so many questions as to why my children were being removed. He could not provide me any answers, and even with the guidance of the attorney right in my presence, we still couldn't get the answers that we were looking for. I immediately contacted an Uber and had to get to Concord as fast as I could because I was not home. Can you imagine the ride that I had to endure and take, knowing that my children are being removed from my home and not knowing as to why? The thought process, the hurt, the pain, the anguish of knowing something just isn't right, and you just want answers and you're just melting and you can't figure life out for itself. You have all these thoughts going through your head, all these different types of emotions. Because at the end of the day, you still don't know why your children are being removed. All you can hear is the pain and agony in your husband's voice. And as a husband, an African-American father, I cannot even relate or empathize with him and what he was experiencing and going through. All I could do was focus on how to get there and fight to get my kids back. When I arrived into the neighborhood, the Uber driver said, "You've got to be kidding me. You live in this neighborhood? I see children that have no clothes, no food, and yet they're here." I began to cry and I said, "Exactly." As we pulled up, Officer Kelly, who I had asked to keep my children there as long as he could so I could say bye, did just that. But my bye was faced with my children buckled up in the personal vehicle of a social worker and my oldest son being torn in tears at 17, not understanding why he had to leave or anyone had to leave. When they left and pulled off, and only I could give was a hug, I had to tell my children to be strong, to be united, but that was shattered, not knowing where my children were going, but then finding out that they were separated and split in 3 separate ways. That is not something that you want to endure. My life was torn apart in less than an hour and 30 minutes, and I'm still living that nightmare.
Thank you, Yolanda. Our next speaker is Amalia Petian Wilson. Amalia, you are welcome to speak now and press star 6 to unmute yourself.
Okay, one second. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Good afternoon, and I want to say thank you to everybody for listening to me today. I am 51 years old. I have 4 adult children, ages 32, 23, 22, and 18, and 5 minor children, 17, 15, 13, 9, and 7. My case started because a Wake County CPS worker not explaining to me what CPS court was, essentially lying by omission. When I contacted the worker's supervisor and expressed that a proper investigation wasn't done, the next day my children were kidnapped from their home with guns drawn. When we went to court, I was told that the court proceedings were not about me, that it was about their father on his discipline of our daughter. But yet they brought criminal charges against me, which all have been dropped. I'm no longer smoking marijuana, but now I'm being told that my past marijuana use and my occasional consumption of alcohol is the problem. If you check my criminal record, I have no DUIs, no DWI. I've never been fired for drinking. My children, my family, my friends have never seen me drunk. I was under the impression that CPS was about keeping families together, but they are doing everything to keep us apart. My children have expressed their desire to be home with me, and that is being ignored. My 4 adult children have never been spoken to. I have evidence that the judge refuses to look at, and is the same evidence that caused my criminal charges to be dropped. I'm trying to get a new attorney. They're trying to talk me out of getting a new attorney while they're doing everything to keep my children and I apart, even though I've done everything they've asked me to do. The fact that my children have not accused me of anything is not being considered. They're motivated by their feelings and not facts. They need to be stopped. They claim that my 9-year-old son that's in their care needs to be put on Abilify, when the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry have advised against that. They're going against my wishes for him not to be put on medication. My GAL recommendation is for my children to come back home with me, and they have changed her recommendations on the paperwork. They claim that my 9-year-old son suffers from PTSD. They're not thinking about the fact that my son has never been away from me, and when they snatched him from his home and placed him with strangers, that's what has caused PTSD in my son. One of my daughters has lost her virginity in their care. My children are worse off with them than they are with me. Another one of my daughters has ran away from their facility. These people have also caused me to lose my beautiful 5-bedroom home. Next month, I will be moving into my new home. I don't understand why my children cannot be with me and why they can't give me random drug tests as I'm raising my children in my home. Thank you.
Thank you, Amalia. Our next speaker is Yvonne Pollard. Yvonne, you can press *6 to unmute yourself and begin when the timer comes up on the screen.
Okay, thank you.
Yvonne, we can't hear you that well. If you can speak a little bit louder.
Okay, I'll try. Is that better?
Yes.
Okay, my name's Yvonne, and I'm coming from the family of Pollard in Columbus County, North Carolina, and our nightmare started in New Hanover County. This situation is an ongoing nightmare for our family, but our story is not unique. As you see, 1,200 North Carolina parents have their rights terminated each year, and they're disproportionately Black and overwhelmingly poor. You've heard all that before. My story is we were prejudged, and the allegations with rebuttable assumptions, they were spread through caseworker after caseworker. Several caseworkers' hands that this went through, and believed that our story would fall through the cracks. In less than 90 days, there were already workers involved, more than one, and getting to know the worker was basically impossible. She was born in April, and she was taken and removed from my care by July. That was less than 90 days. So they don't want to admit that they jumped the gun. They promised to get to know the family. They promised to provide and assist, but none of that ever happened. Several family members have petitioned. I filed several papers in the courts, and they've all been denied. And the last hearing, I was told that I should have known the information, but I've been denied all the information. They are keeping us silent under the guise of the best interest of the child, which is not. You allowed her tender years for us to visit. From 2019 until last year, 4 years, the family were allowed to visit. There was never any harm, abuse, or neglect. We've been stopped from visiting for an entire year now, and we have no idea where she is. She should not be removed from her siblings, and we just want to bring Taiba home. They did not follow their own laws, their own policies. They're high turnover, and nobody's following their own policy. There needs to be accountability for what they've done. Like I said, she was never abused or neglected. They were just assumptions because I didn't look like what they thought that she should have as a grandmother. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Yvonne. We have time for one more speaker, and that's Lindsay Harrison. Lindsay, press *6 to unmute yourself and begin when the timer comes on the screen. Lindsay, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Great, we can hear you loud and clear.
Wonderful. Thank you for the panel and for everyone sharing their stories today. I too was touched. And as a mother, as a former social worker, as a community member, two things I just wanted to be at the forefront that kind of kept coming up, where the first thing is, our current, the way that we are quote unquote protecting children and families is very short-sighted, is the issue of removing children, and we're not looking long term. We're not looking, what is the impact of this on the family, on the child? Is this they're willing to be a parent until 18 to 21, but after that, no supports, nothing. There's been decades, years of trauma. And so as we look through these questions of policy, of funding, I want to keep bringing it back to the children, to the young adults, to the families, that this is about them. And I think Amanda made the point where when we can have the most amazing policies in the world and the best funding, but if the decision makers and our community members are not equipped with the eyes of respect, of dignity, of truth, of hearing families, of supporting families, then nothing will ever change. And so it's really work at a personal level. I've been in the courtroom for some of the families that were on the call today telling their stories. And I've witnessed firsthand how sometimes judges interact with families, interact with parents in a way that is adversarial and not kind, not curious. I've seen attorneys speak up for the parents and really be truthful and be honest and be impactful, and the whole spectrum. And so all of us as individuals, whether we are family members, community members, attorneys, judges, social workers, really need to do some work on how our eyes and our hearts and our minds are seeing families and safety. And then the second thing before the time is over is that, we need to just fully support families before children are removed. It was made points of $500 a day, $500 a month. What if we infuse that money and that care and that kindness into our families and supported them there, instead of removing the kids? Again, when safety, that is at the forefront. Safety is always, always, always number one. When that is not an issue, how can we be creative and kind and give dignity to our families, whether it's through straight up cash, whether it's our time, before just knee jerk and removing kids, and really just kids want to be with their families. And so that should be the goal.
Thank you, Lindsay. And that concludes public comment.
Thank you to all of our public commenters, and thank you to all of the committee members and the members of the public, again, who participated today. We will, again, continue to accept written testimony until September 23rd. And Liliana's email address is in the chat. It's lschiller@usccr.gov. Our next panel will focus on government and policy perspectives, and it will take place on Wednesday, August 7th at 11 a.m. Eastern Time via Zoom. We hope that you are all able to join. Thank you all. And today's meeting is adjourned at 2:31. You may now disconnect and have a lovely afternoon.
Everyone.